Today's Daily Bread Guide message is chapter Judges 15. How even a person with weaknesses like Samson can be used. Verse 1 to 8, the revenge of Samson. Verse 9 to 13, the people of Judah hand Samson over to the Philistines. Verse 14 to 17, Ramath Lehi killed 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. Verse 18 to 20, in Hakore, the spring. God knows our weaknesses, but God uses us even with such weaknesses if we are in the calling of God. God uses us as we are, even though we are not perfect, even though we have weaknesses. Let's look at the first part, verse 1. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him go in. The previous chapter, because of the wrongdoing of Samson, his wife's father did not give his daughter to Samson, and he gave his daughter to Samson's friend. And verse 2, he said, "I was so sure you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your companion." So verse 3, Samson said to them, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." Verse 4 and 5, it describes how Samson reacted. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain, together with the vineyards and olive groves. So as we can see here, he is a person quick-tempered and also impatient. So here we have the question, why God still uses Samson, such a person with lack of good personality? The reason is that he stayed in the calling of God. He knew the calling of God to him, and he kept his calling to save the Israelites. Because of his understanding about his calling of God, he had the strong intention for the salvation of Israel. There are people who have good personality, but sometimes they still lack the passion and the desire to achieve the calling of God. For Samson, it was to save the Israelites. God knows our weaknesses. God knows that we are not perfect. However, God does not use us based on our perfection, but He uses us if we know His calling and if we keep His calling. So this is our hope, that if you and I hold on to the calling of God, then God will use us regardless of our weaknesses. Let's move to the second part. The people of Judah hand Samson over to the Philistines. Here we may wonder why the people handed Samson over to the Philistines. Let's read verse 10 to 12. The people of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" "We have come to take Samson prisoner," they answered, "to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." They said to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." So this is so weird that why Judah why the people of Judah try to hand Samson over to the Philistines, even though they are the same country, they are the same people. The people, 3,000 people, they wanted to avoid a crisis, and they handed Samson over to the Philistines in order for their for safety. There are people who choose themselves in order to avoid those situations that seems disadvantageous to them, like the people, 3,000 people of Judah. They do not have the identity, and they compromised with the Philistines. There are people like parents who always say the mission is the most valuable thing. But if their children say, "I'm going to go to the mission field as a missionary," then they oppose their idea. The people, 3,000 people of Judah, they are like the Christians of Korea today. They do not know who they belong to. Our enemy is not the people of Judah or Samson, but the Philistines. We have to fight against the Philistines to save the Israel, but the 3,000 people of Judah, they fought against their own nation in order to avoid a crisis. So we have to decide to be brave even in front of the crisis, and we have to keep our identity and shouldn't compromise with those crises for the sake of their own safety. Samson here is weak for sure, and he has he's quick-tempered and impatient. However, he's loyal to God. He knows his identity, and he tries to protect his country, his people. Let's move to the third part, verse 14 to 15. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him, shouting, "The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him." The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hand. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Even with his weaknesses and his such a person with impatience. However, the the verse 14 says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, not 3,000 people of Judah. And he grabbed a fresh bone of a donkey and struck down 1,000 men. So God poured out his Spirit on Samson, even with his weaknesses. Not 3,000 people of Judah who sacrificed his nation for their own safety. So we all can be broken and there are weaknesses and we sometimes can fall down, but God uses God pours His Spirit on the one who keeps his identity and who fights for his people. So after this, the part 4, Samson became thirsty. Verse 18 and 19, because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. And Samson drank, his strength returned and revived. So the spring was called En-Hakkore and is still there in Lehi. So when he cried out to the Lord, God renewed and restored his strength. Verse 20, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. He reigned Israel for 20 years. It seems like there was no governance set. There was no authority. It seems to me that Samson just did his best to rule the nation, but he did not have the companion to support him. So his reign is quite different from the reign of other judges who were supported by his people. So from this passage, we can have 3 conclusions. First, God uses the people with weaknesses. The second conclusion is that even though God uses the one with weaknesses, but if there is some brokenness and some weaknesses and some sins, then they have to deal with the result, the consequences of those weaknesses. The difficulties may follow. So we have to deal with our the personality, and we have to bear the fruit of the sin, even though we are used by God. The third one is that the 3,000 people of Judah is like the Church of Korea, who does not have the identity as a Christian. There is no spiritual sense. They do not know who's the ally and who's the enemy. They are fighting against their ally. So we have to encompass the spiritual sense that what is for the kingdom of God and what is against the kingdom of God. Then we have to choose to fight for God, fight against our enemy, the Philistines. So I bless you to be used by God, and you have to deal with your weaknesses, and also we have to hold our identity as a Christian, to fight for God. God bless you.